Hi, cool kids. Welcome back to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you here. What I wanted to do is in this first podcast of April of 2025 is sit down and talk with you about what are the relationships that you want with your adult children and your grandchildren. And what I mean by this is that a lot of times when we're talking about child and grandchild estrangement, alienation, some of these things that go on, I think that we oftentimes feel like it's the adult children who are acting irrationally that responded to something as a 10 when it was a 2. When we have these interactions and they just seem like they're crazy, they're going off the rails, and there's nothing that we can do about it. We feel like we don't have much control. And certainly that is something that does come up. But I wanted to take a little bit of a look in the mirror for us and look at some of the things that we, as older parents, as grandparents, can sometimes do either on purpose or inadvertently that can really cause a rift with that relationship. And a couple of the people that I'm connected with, DeeDee Moore from More Than Grand and Dr. Kerry Byrne from the Long Distance Grandparents. And both of them talk about that parent-child relationship, about some of the strains that go on, about some of the different activities that we can do to also mend those fences if we've need to repair relationships. But I want to kind of take this opportunity, focus in on like 4 things that maybe sometimes grandparents are guilty of doing that we don't often want to really recognize. And the first one I want to talk about is not respecting your adult child's choices, especially when they're ones that you wouldn't approve of. Now, certainly when kids are living in your house, it's your rules. I know it's a common saying, when you're under my roof, you follow my rules. Whether it's going to church or coming in at curfew, whatever those things are, by the time the kids are really late teenagers, early adults, and certainly by the time they're out of your house, they need to be making their own choices. And we've got 2 ways that we can respond to that. We can either get very upset, and we can also really have those hard discussions where we let them know how upset, disappointed we are in their decisions. And then the other part of that too is we can really try to work the kids into feeling guilty about what it is that they're doing. Now, some of these choices that I'm talking about are along the lines of politics, religion, parenting styles. And these are things where, honestly, if we've done a good job as parents, then hopefully our kids have done a good job of thinking through some of their decisions. And a lot of the decisions and a lot of these things, philosophies that we're talking about, aren't ones that we probably won't see our kids pivot from and make changes as they get older. It's ones where I think if we think back to when we were in high school, when we were in college, when we were in those early 20s and we were finding ourselves, part of our separation from our parents and creating our own identities is doing things different from our parents. Some grandparents and parents really have a tough time with this, especially when I think it comes around issues of religion, parenting style, and politics. Those are the 3 big ones. There's certainly other ones out there, but I think what we have to do when we have children that are making different choices is to think about what kind of relationship do we want? I mean, do we want to sever that? Do we want to make these a strained relationship because of the choices that they're making? And how do their choices affect you? Now, I'm not talking about choices where it leads to substance abuse, where financial fraud, financial collapse, those sorts of things. I'm talking about here ones where they're deciding to live their lives differently. And we have the decision as grandparents and as older parents to either accept that and to try to keep those lines of communication open and to keep the love and respect in that relationship, or we become the ones that make it difficult and will sometimes lead the kids to alienate us and to sever that relationship. And along with that severing of the relationship with the adult children, a lot of times that comes with severing that relationship or minimizing that relationship with the grandchildren. So we don't want any of that. It's one thing to, I think, to examine, right? When the kids are doing things different from you, how do you want that relationship to proceed? And that's not taking little digs at them when you have an opportunity. It's respecting their decisions. It's keeping lines of communication open. Certainly, if things change and they want to, let's say they left religion and they want to start to come back to it, they're not going to be able to journey back to that and ask your advice if you've let it known how disappointed you are in them, how you made it difficult for them around that topic earlier. They're not going to be the ones that are reaching back out to you for, what do you think about this? And we've been thinking about joining this local church, and we've been thinking about taking the grandchildren to Sunday school, whatever that might look like. They're not going to be asking you those questions if you've come down and made it pretty clear how upset and disappointed you are around those topics. The next thing I want to talk about too is giving gifts that the parents haven't approved of, or that come with expectations that you haven't really laid out with the adult children, right? I think sometimes as grandparents, we certainly want to do fun things. We want to go for the double scoop of ice cream. We want to try to do an adventure trip. We want to do different things because partly we're probably a little bit better off financially than we were when we had little kids. And so we can do things for the grandkids a little bit more than what we could do for our children. That's not always the case, but it is part of the growing experience, right? As you get older, typically your income standard of living will increase, and now you have a little bit more resources. What we don't want here, and what causes a lot of problems, is grandparents showing up with huge presents or lots of gifts, and there's expectations all associated with those things beyond just the fact that we want to give something fun to the grandchildren. A lot of times grandparents and older parents will use gift giving as a leverage point in a relationship, as a way of trying to get closer with the grandchildren, and not necessarily in a positive way, but a way that really upsets the adult children. For instance, minimalism is kind of or maybe not kind of, but it's a mindset. It's something that's being adopted by a lot of younger parents, in that they're not looking for china hutches, they're not looking for big buffet tables, they're not looking at a lot of things that maybe our parents acquired, that we acquired. And so they're looking at one or two small gifts at a birthday party, for example, or holiday times. And for you to show up with a dump truck full of presents and then expect that the entire day is going to be about unwrapping and playing with your presents and doing all these things in front of you, can really upset the kids with what they're trying to teach and how they're trying to raise your grandchildren. So it's something to be mindful of. And the other part of that too is that gifts we need to be careful of as grandparents, because we need to make sure, in my opinion, that we're making mom and dad the rock stars. That grandpa and grandma are certainly really fun entertainment, but mom and dad should be the rock stars. And if we're doing things where mom and dad can afford and are budgeted for a certain gift amount, and we come in with 5 to 10 times that gift amount, that really kind of shows up the adult kids and it puts them into a bad light. Do little kids think about this stuff? Not really. They just see the big fun presents. but the adult children can definitely feel that and can take it the wrong way. And sometimes, honestly, I think grandparents do that kind of on purpose. And so that's not a great thing to do. So I think being aware of the gifts that you give, making sure that you run it by the adult children. And certainly this isn't every single thing you do, but I think when you're doing a big gesture, when you're doing something that size, you want to run it by them, make sure everybody understands what expectations are and everybody is on board with what that activity is. The third thing that I think we do sometimes as grandparents and as older parents is not respect our kids' schedules. Our kids are under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. Not that we weren't when we were parents, but things are a little bit different than where we were 20, 30, 40 years ago as young parents. And so we need to really make sure that our calendars get into alignment with our kids' calendars and what their expectations are. I've got a young man who is having in-laws as well as, I guess, aunts and uncles in-laws come into town. He's still working throughout the week and his house is completely flooded with people. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you have people on the hideaway beds, when you have people in guest rooms and the kids' rooms all over the place, and they just show up, that can be a big disruption without really sitting down and scheduling that time with everybody, making sure everybody's on board. The same thing with randomly picking up grandkids from school if you live in the same town, or randomly just popping in on the adult kids. If you don't have that kind of relationship, it can be really disruptive and it can cause a lot of friction because sometimes mom wants to pick up the kids and just get home, kick off shoes, throw microwave pizza into the microwave and call it good for dinner. That's not always the best, and mom probably knows that, but sometimes moms are just done. And sometimes dads are just done at the end of the day, and that's what they do. And for having parents or in-laws just spontaneously drop by when you're frazzled and when the kids aren't behaving and you don't really have that kind of relationship, that can put a lot of strain and additional stress on that relationship. And, sometimes these things are just inadvertent and we make mistakes and we need to just kind of apologize and make it okay. And it's not a big deal. Other times, I think grandparents can really kind of steamroll their way in to events and to the grandkids and the adult kids' lives where it feels very intrusive. So it's something for us to be aware of, that we're checking in, especially with the daughters and daughter-in-laws. They typically will have most of the social calendar planned out for the family. Sometimes that's not the case, but a lot of times it is. So let's respect those schedules. Let's not trample all over free time. Let's not show up unannounced. Just make sure that that's something that we're respecting their space and their time. And because we'd want the same thing for us, right? This last part is something that, I kind of feel strongly about. Talking with a number of adult grandchildren, one of the biggest things that they talk about is seeing the relationship that grandpa and grandma have towards each other and really being aware of that, even as little kids. So if the grandkids happen to see grandpa and grandma arguing, and not just a little like, do you want pizza or spaghetti tonight? And having a back and forth about that, but actually really getting in and arguing, that can leave an impression on those kids, especially when they don't get a chance to see you guys making up and they don't see how relationships, when they're in conflict, can be resolved. The same thing goes for if you happen to get into an argument with your son-in-law, your daughter-in-law. When the grandkids are seeing you actually really argue about things such as politics or religion or parenting styles, schedules, when you're trying to talk about the gifts and the kids are old enough to really understand what's going on, that leaves a big impact with them. And remember, we want moms and dads to be rock stars to those grandkids. So what we want to do is make sure that they understand that we're not coming in as bullies and pushing their mom and dad around, because they'll know that. They'll see it. And that's going to be a big strain. The kids won't necessarily know how to deal with it, but they'll also be really wary as far as doing anything that might upset you when they've seen you raise your voice, when they've seen things get really tense. That's going to just put a strain on that relationship. And that's something that we can control. We can make sure that we are out of earshot when we're having a discussion. We can make sure that is the argument really necessary? Maybe that's number one. Is the argument really necessary? Or are you just having a bad day and you're venting? You're making a 2 into a 10 because somebody cut you off in traffic on the way to the kid's birthday party. Whatever that is. If grandkids see you arguing actively with the parents, that's really going to be a turnoff for that relationship. So I know I've talked a little bit about this. There's certainly other ways that grandparents and older parents can mess up relationships with the kids, and that can cause them to withdraw from us and vice versa. I mean, there's ways and things that they do that make us want to withdraw or feel like we have to withdraw. And I don't want that for anybody. So if you're finding that your relationship is getting really tense, if you find that there's a lot of things going on, little hidden, I don't know, I don't want to get into high school drama stuff here, but if people aren't responding back as fast as they normally would, and you're starting to read a little bit into these things, do a check. Make sure that you're going through these 4 things at the very least, making sure where you are with these. Are you respecting their choices? Are you giving gifts that have hidden expectations that are causing problems? Are you not respecting the kids' schedules? Are you arguing with your adult kids in front of the grandkids? And are they seeing that? So just, check those things out, see where you are with those. If you need to make any adjustments to those, do it while you still can, before you lose those relationships and before they get blown up or burnt down, whatever metaphor you want to use there. And I hope that you found this helpful as far as just taking a look in the mirror, seeing where you are with your relationships, seeing where maybe you need to do some patchwork. If you found this helpful, that you pass it on to some of the other older parents or grandparents in your network. And next week, we're going to be back having a really cool interview with Jane Honickman. We're going to be talking about support systems for postpartum depression, and we're going to really get in and dig into that topic. So it'll be informative. So I hope you tune back in next week with this conversation with Jane. And until next time, remember to stay cool.